Hi, I'm DuEwa Frazier, and you're listening to episode 57 of Nerdacity Podcast, and we're in season 5. Today I have a wonderful guest who's joining me, and her name is Victoria Christopher Murray. She is the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of more than 30 novels, including the New York Times Instant Bestsellers, The Personal Librarian, and The First Ladies. Both novels Victoria co-wrote with Marie Benedict. A native New Yorker, Victoria Christopher Murray attended Hampton University, shout out to my alma mater, where she majored in communication disorders. After graduating, Victoria attended New York University's Stern Business School, where she received her MBA degree in marketing. Victoria spent 10 years in corporate America before she tested her entrepreneurial spirit. She opened a financial services agency for Aegon USA, where she managed the number one division for 9 consecutive years. However, Victoria always dreamed of writing, and in 1997, she pursued her dream. Victoria originally self published her first novel, Temptation, and in 2000, Time Warner published that novel. Temptation remained on the Essence bestsellers list for 9 consecutive months. In 2001, Victoria received her first NAACP Image Award nomination for Outstanding Literature with Temptation. Over her career, Victoria has received numerous awards, including the Phyllis Wheatley Trailblazer Award, the Delta Sigma Theta Osceola Award for Excellence in the Arts, Go On Girl Book Club Author of the Year, 11 African American Literary Awards, and 5 NAACP Image Award nominations. In 2016, she won the Image Award for Outstanding Literature for her social commentary novel, Stand Your Ground. Victoria's latest book is titled Harlem Rhapsody. I hope you'll listen and enjoy this episode, and please follow Nerdacity Arts on Instagram at Nerdacity Arts and follow on X at Nerdacity Pod 1. Also visit my website at www.duewafrazier.com and definitely visit the website of my guest, victoriachristophermurray.com. Thanks so much for listening. Hi, Victoria.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well, and how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good.
So excited to speak with you today and just really want to congratulate you on your latest book, Harlem Rhapsody.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And again, thank you for joining me on Nerdosity Podcast. It is such a treat to talk with such a notable and award winning author as yourself. And Victoria, we know that you are a prolific author with many books, many fiction books to your credit. You're also a publisher, a founding publisher. You've been involved with screenwriting adaptation of your books for film. And so I love for you to just discuss how the recent years have been for you, all the excitement surrounding your books. And I was one of the fans watching when your books were adapted for the Lifetime series. I think it was Lust, Greed, and Envy. Am I correct?
Yeah, it was lust, envy, greed, wrath, and pride.
Wrath and Pride, yes. Oh my gosh, it was so awesome to just see that come to life in that way. And you had all your fellow Hamptonians cheering you on, and all your author book fans cheering you on, and it was just amazing to see all of your hard work come to fruition in that manner.
Yeah, so two things. I don't have anything to do with the screenwriting of my movies. Purposefully, I'm a novelist.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so that's on purpose. The best screenwriters are people who are screenwriters, not novelists.
Yes.
So I don't have anything to do with that, which is a good thing.
Okay.
Because that it's a very good thing because I need to write novels, and I don't need anyone telling me how to write novels, and they don't need anyone telling them how to write movies.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. I just assumed, well, you were, on that side as well, but that's
Oh yeah,
fine. And for people who are like emerging, writers, that's really good for them to know because they'll be
yeah.
listening, when this podcast drops.
I do. Yeah, people are always so amazed with the movies part of it.
Yeah,
And yes, I please don't misunderstand me, but number one, I'm a novelist. And number one, before I want to have a movie made, I want to have a novel written
there you
and
go.
accepted. And so I don't, when I'm writing my novels, I don't think about them becoming movies. Um, I just don't. And because they are novels turned into movies, none of us are going to get rich off of them. It's just
Mm,
a nice thing to add to your portfolio. Uh,
exactly.
yeah, so that's it for me, but it's not that's not my focus at all.
Yeah.
I interviewed someone last night. She and I, two authors, and we were interviewing each other, and she was saying having a book made into a movie was her dream,
Oh,
and
wow.
I was saying, yeah, once you have it done, I think you'll pass the dream. We're writers, we're novelists, and so we want to
Wow,
stay with that.
this is surprising for me, but Victoria, this is a real education because you do hear writers saying, and now when we see that the what is it? When they have the rights, on publishers marketplace and things like that, you hear about these writers that are already getting the film rights taken care of before they even get the book done.
Yeah, so
So,
well, yeah, because most of the time that does happen if you are an author with a name and everything, because we've had already interest in Harlem Rhapsody.
oh
But
wow.
yeah, that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine. If someone is interested in purchasing the option for my book to become a movie, that's
Hmm.
fine with me. But the number one thing I want to do is write books and sell this book.
That's right. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Victoria. And certainly you're someone that I've always looked up to as someone who is a very serious writer. So I do want to mention that. And following you and knowing that, I remember seeing you when you were you did an event some years ago, Delta Authors on Tour, that I
Yes.
attended in the Midwest. And I'm like, wow, Victoria is just always doing her thing out there. Like, you come away and write your books and the books come out and then you'll be on your tours and it's like you've done that whole process beautifully, and it's like you set a model for so many other writers or emerging novelists to follow. And I just wonder what you think about that and really being a leader in African American literature, on the contemporary landscape and actually in a Christian landscape as well.
Yeah. So, you know what's so interesting about the Christian landscape? I get a lot of credit for being the mother of African American Christian fiction. But it's so funny that I get the credit for that when that's never what I was trying to write. Um,
Wow.
I never even heard of Christian fiction. I'd never read a Christian fiction book. Well, there was
Mhm.
a reason for that. I was the first Black woman to do it.
Right.
But I had never, it wasn't like I was trying to write a Christian book. I was just writing about people I knew. And in fact, it was a title that I loved and hated at the same time.
Mm.
Because I loved it because of what it said about me, but I hated it not only because I felt like it would limit my market, because people who were not Christians wouldn't read, and I was certainly writing for them. But then people got mad at me because there are certain things that Christian writers do and don't mention in books, and I
Hmm.
was mentioning everything. I mean, because I
Right.
wasn't writing a Christian book. And so then I had people, readers really upset. And I was like, that's because y'all put me in the genre. Nah, I didn't put myself in there. But
Right.
it was a blessing at the same time because it gave people who really did want to be in the Christian market, when they saw my first novel, it gave them hope that there was a place for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's how God used me with that. Because the first book came out, and then every other publisher wanted to have their own temptation. But then after that temptation for me, I
Yes.
mean, and then when I went to the next few books, people were like, "This ain't Christian."
And
So
it's like, well, don't get mad at me because I see what you're saying now. It's like, wait, I didn't say this is the genre I'm focused on.
and before historical fiction, I never wrote to a genre. Never.
Mm,
Even when I wrote Temptation, I'd never heard of Christian fiction, so you can't write something you've never even heard of.
true.
I never heard of Christian fiction. And then even once people started calling me that, I never wrote a book saying, what's my Christian message in here? The thing that it was just interesting about me is that I'm a spiritual person, spiritual, not religious. And because of that, my faith is always going to be with me. I
Yes.
am not ashamed of my faith. I will tell everybody, people will know. I don't have to tell anyone anything about me. And so I'm not ashamed of it, but don't get mad at me if it doesn't live up to what you've wanted, because I've never written to a genre. The first time and I'm so sorry if you hear the sirens. I'm in Harlem. I'm
Oh,
in New
you're in Harlem, okay, because you are on tour.
Yes,
Right. Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
And so I'm in my hotel room, and I'm like, oh my God, and I'm right in the Renaissance Hotel right next to the Apollo Theater.
Oh, yes.
And I'm like, oh my
Well,
goodness,
you're right in the middle. Yeah. Well,
I,
it's a busy area there, so you're with the folks. That's
I'm with the
cool.
folks. I'm with the folks. I love being with the folks, but they're gonna have to stop this siren stuff, man.
It's
It,
okay. This makes it a real live podcast, so
That
that's
isn't
cool.
it? It's truly. I apologize. Who knew?
It's
When I'm home in DC, I'm in my office is totally blocked off from everything, so you never hear anything. And here in this hotel, very
mhm.
nice hotel, and I wanted the room that faced 125th Street, and I got it. That's
And
what
you
I
got it
get.
all right. Mm.
That's what I
Well,
get. That's what I get.
yes.
So, but as I was saying before, historical fiction, I have never ever written to a genre. I just write what's in my heart.
And so that was purposeful, in other words. But then, Victoria, does that mean an agent or an editor never asked you right off? Well, what genre is this? Are you
Never asked my agent. Never asked my agent. Doesn't care. She's only, and I've only had two. One passed away, and then her protege became my agent. So I've been with Liza for 15 years.
wow?
But none of them ever asked me what was my genre. They just read the books.
Well, that's wonderful because so many write off with the submission process. They're asking you, and then they're looking for that. They're looking that it has the
Yeah.
characteristics of whatever that genre is supposed to be.
Yeah. So I guess maybe that was one of the benefits of me starting in this business all those years ago, such a long time ago.
Right.
I don't know how it is now, but yeah, no one's ever asked me. And it was really interesting because one time my agent was saying something. I don't know if we were going to try to do something different, or we were trying to come up with a book idea. And she said, Victoria, most of my clients, I can say to them, let's just go back to your regular formula. And she said, I can't do that with you because you
Yes,
don't
I
have a
can't
regular
do that with
formula.
you.
And she's like, so we just have to start from scratch, honey, because I can't even say, let's do your regular formula.
I love that. And in that way, do you feel as though you don't have the constraints? You don't have anyone telling you to do it in a cookie cutter or template type fashion. In other words, they trust that what you're creating, one, it's original. It's and they trust whatever it is, it's going to be a hot seller because you have a track record.
Yeah, I think now it doesn't matter. I mean, now I really am in a genre. I'm in the historical fiction genre. But what's so interesting about historical fiction is that my books are a combination of the foundation. What drives my book is the history, but it's a little bit of romance, a little bit of Christian fiction, a little
Hmm.
bit of women's issues. It's
Hmm.
historical fiction lends itself to everything.
Right.
So that's what I'm writing now.
And Victoria, what has been your primary inspiration in, going toward that historical fiction focus? Do you feel that it is speaking to the audience, primarily the African American audience, the women's audience, or is that something that's just very dear and close to you?
So my with historical fiction, my primary audience is an African American. That's how I made the New York Times. I guess it would be called crossing over or whatever, but
Wow.
I no longer have an African American audience as the
Audience.
primary audience. I
Hmm.
still have my, people who supported me all through the years, but it's not primarily Black. I've gotten more. When I wrote The Personal Librarian, it was predominantly white readers.
Yes.
When I wrote the next book, the First Ladies, we got a few more Black people coming out. And
Yeah.
then with my book, Harlem Rhapsody, it's probably 50-50. I've been at signings where it's predominantly Black, and I've been at the bigger signings when there's like 1,400 people, it's predominantly white.
Yeah, I saw you've been at a lot of the libraries and Kennedy Center, and I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, many of those venues are definitely going to draw more of a racial mix.
Yes. But what draws me to this history now, when I first wrote The Personal Librarian, I thought that I was just writing an interesting story. Because I don't want to ever be locked into one genre, I love the idea of doing a separate, something new. It challenged me. But then I think a couple of things just converged together that it was, I was very interested in this new genre. It stretched me in ways that other writings did not because of the research, and because I'd never written it before. And then what began happening in our country, and they started talking about banning books and erasing history. We wrote the First Ladies, but then when I wrote Harlem Rhapsody, it was almost like I was on a mission,
Mm,
because what was happening is they were saying my history didn't matter.
that's right.
And so I was like, okay, okay, I got something for you. Every time you try to bury my history, I'm going to excavate it. I'm going to find one person. And then every time you try to ban one book, I'm going to write two. I mean,
Wow.
it's almost like my art has become my activism
Mm,
in this time period, and they're trying to cut off our oxygen,
yes.
and I feel like my words can give us life. And
Mm,
so it's my resistance while they're going to say my history doesn't matter. I'm going to find all of these important stories that we need to know. And I'm not talking about somebody who invented a shoelace, so that was important.
yes.
I'm talking about somebody who started the Harlem Renaissance.
Mm,
I'm talking about major things in our life, people who've had major impact in our life. And that's all I want to do now. I want to just use my art as activism, my art as resistance to what's going on in this country. This is my way to fight fascism against us. And I hope to have readers understand that reading is their resistance, because they
That's
don't
right.
want you to know about it. They want to ban these kinds of books.
Mm.
And so we can just be in this thing together, fighting in the thing that we know best.
That's right. And that's so well stated and so powerful, Victoria. I appreciate you discussing that because I think sometimes, we get lost in that, hey, all of these things have happened in recent years. And what is a creative to do? And so I appreciate you asking because I often ask toward the end of the podcast, my guests, what is the writer or what is the poet's charge or purpose during this time? And you've clearly stated
Yeah,
that
I know
this.
my it is
Mhm.
so clear to me, and it became very clear as I was writing Harlem Rhapsody. It was almost like William W.E.B. Du Bois was speaking to me.
Mm,
Because he's always felt that art should be activism. He always
that's
he
right.
always felt that it should uplift our race, and
Mm,
not just writing to be writing. And so for many
true.
years I was writing just to be writing. And people took away messages and everything, but now I'm on a mission.
Mm, that's so important. And thank you for that. And do you find, Victoria, that in terms of uh, your own inspirations, do you still find that there are writers, whether past or present, that inspire you, whose work you say, okay, they've done a great job, and I am, while you're very unique, as I mentioned, being a leader in the genres you've written in. But do you have, I guess, writers or authors who have inspired you over the years?
Anybody who writes a good book inspires me. And you will know when I read a good book, because I do not I read a lot of books, and I only promote a book if it knocks me out of my socks. And
Mm.
so there are really writers who do this. I was on an interview, as I said last night, with a another writer, Dolan Perkins Valdez, and she's written a book called Happy Land.
Oh
And
yeah.
and
Hmm.
what's so interesting about Dolan's books is she writes one every 2, 3, 4 years, because she takes her time. She's a professor also,
Yes.
so she takes her time with this. But I said to her last night, it's so interesting to me that every year she writes a book, it becomes my favorite book of the year.
Wow.
And I said, so how do you do that? Like, how do you do that? So Dolan is a big one for me. Shadiqua Johnson, who wrote I've always read all of her books, really enjoyed them, but everybody in America needs to read Yellow White.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Did you read that one?
I have not read it, but I've heard about it.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that book, I've never read a book. This is the only book where I cannot believe, I'm telling you, it is not like this. I stay in this hotel a lot, and it is never like this.
Yeah,
And
that's
so,
okay.
okay, so I am so sorry.
No, no, no.
But
It's I look at it like it's giving the podcast even more character.
that's right,
It's
you're getting it. This is has character. We are in Harlem. I just brought all of y'all. One of my favorite songs right now is Drop Me Off in Harlem. We are
yes,
dropping the folks off
off in right in Harlem.
right next to the Apollo Theater. Y'all are in Harlem for real. But Yellow Wife is by Shaniqua Johnson, is the only book I can think of in 40, 50 years. So my whole life, it feels like, where
Hmm.
I kept saying, okay, Victoria, do not turn to the back page. Do not turn to the back page. Because
Wow.
I was just thinking, if I could turn to the back page and read the back page, then I'll be able to breathe.
Yep.
because there were I've never had a book that where I couldn't breathe. And I
Mm,
tell when I describe the story of Yellow Wife, I tell people it's brutal and it's beautiful.
mm.
And how she could have written that all on the same page, I do not know. And so if you give me a good book, that's all I need is a good book. You're going to inspire me.
Wow. And Victoria, in terms of you talk about your inspiration now, if we can circle back to Harlem Rhapsody, what inspired you to write this historical fiction piece, and why Harlem?
Well, it wasn't that I was thinking Harlem. All I was thinking was who did I want to write about? Because in historical fiction, I write biographical novels. That's what I
Mhm.
love. And there's lots of different ways to write historical fiction. You can just set the story in 1960 and it'll be historical. But I'm trying to find people where all everybody will say, "Who knew?" That's what
Mm,
I want. Like, why weren't these people in our history books? So that's
right.
what I'm trying to do. So I then had to look for a person. So I don't look for a person in terms of where they live or anything. I look for a person in terms of time period. And there are two decades that interest me the most. And I think as writers, you must write what interests you. And the
Mm,
two decades are the 1920s, and then the 1960s. And what's so interesting about them is I think they interest me for the very same reasons. Of course, it's the fashion, it's the
mm,
music, it's the dance and the theater. All both of those decades had the Gilded Age and the 60s. I
yeah.
mean, they are wonderful, both wonderful. And then both of them are a period of political strife, civil uprising, and the rise of Black pride.
Mm,
Like the 1920s was the first time Black people began to look in the mirror and see themselves with pride. It was 50 years after emancipation. And even though there was a low high school graduation rate among Black people, I think it was something like 2%. But
wow.
think about it, half the people alive had been enslaved.
True.
So it was, but at the same time, you had someone like W.E.B. Du Bois being the most educated Black person in the country.
Right. Because he went to Harvard.
He went to Harvard. When
Yes.
he had two undergraduate, it's because of more than that for me. It
Yeah.
was that he went to Fisk first, and then when he went to the University of Massachusetts at Amherst to get his master's, they wouldn't accept the Fisk credits. So he
Mm,
had to get another undergraduate degree and then the graduate degree, and then he went to Harvard and was the very first man to get a PhD from very
right.
first Black man. So
Right.
that's the only time in history that you could say that there was one person who was the most educated person in the world.
Wow.
And that's the only time you can say that. So I was looking at the 20s and the 60s of a time to write. And then you look for major things that happened in those decades. So that's how I bumped into the Harlem Renaissance. Because the 1920s, if you're looking for big things that happened in the 1920s, it's the Harlem Renaissance. And so that took me to New York.
Right.
And so then I didn't really care. I didn't know who it was going to be. I was excited to find that one person whose amazing story I could tell. And it's almost as if she was sitting there waiting for me because I ain't never heard of this woman. Don't know any. If I asked 10 people, a half of one person knew who she was. And I always say I bumped into the Harlem Renaissance. And when I opened the door to the Harlem Renaissance, Jesse was on the other side knocking, saying, finally, somebody
Right.
has come to rescue me. So it wasn't an inspiration at all. I wish I could say that I went about this in such an intelligent way And
Mhm.
I said, I want to write about the Harlem. No, I just said I want the 20s or the 60s. And that's
Mm.
how I came up with this. So
And what
the
Mhm.
person determines where the story is going to be told.
Got you.
Yeah, so she lived in Harlem, so that's where the story had to be told.
And would she have been a friend or say neighbor of, Zora Neale Hurston or Langston Hughes or County Cullen or any of those folks?
Well, the reason I wrote Harlem Rhapsody is because she's the person that discovered all of them. She discovered County Cullen when he was 16 years old, Langston
Mm.
Hughes when he was 17 years old, Nella Larson in her early 20s.
Oh.
Toomer. She taught Gene Toomer when he was a teenager in high school. Zora had already gone to Howard when she came to
Mhm.
Harlem. Jesse was her mentor. So that's all in the book.
Oh.
And what
Okay.
is so amazing about Harlem Rhapsody is that I got to write in the voice of County Cullen when he was 16 and Langston Hughes when he was so afraid to meet the literary editor of the Crisis magazine and
Mhm.
W.E.B. Du Bois, that he took his mother with him to the dinner. And he wrote about that in his biography. So she wasn't contemporary, she discovered them all. When I
Wow.
say she discovered them. None of them had written a word.
They weren't who we
They
came to
were
know
not
them to
written,
be.
they were kids.
Got you.
And so, what was so great about this book is all of them had different angst. Like Langston was in college at Columbia, majoring as an engineer because that's the only way his father would pay for it.
Mhm.
He hated it, and Jesse like kept him there because he was getting a little bit in trouble with not a little trouble. There was racism on the
Yeah.
campus, and so that was his issue. She took care of that. Gene Toomer didn't want to be a Black author. He didn't want to be a white author. He just wanted to be an American author. And he wrote the very first novel. She really got him going, but she could not get him to move away from that. And he never had success because of it. Zora
Mm.
ended up going to Barnard College because of Jesse
Right.
and Jesse publishing her. So she published all of these people before anybody else published them. She
Wow.
published their first poems, second poems, third poems, fourth poems. So somebody told me reading Harlem Rhapsody is like going to a Harlem Renaissance family reunion and
Mm.
meeting all of them when they're young because none of them are legends. They became
Right.
legends because of Jesse Redmond Fawcett.
Yes. Wow. Wow. Now like all the bells are going off and I'm like, "Yes, I've read about Jessie Redmond Fawcett, but I didn't know she was instrumental in all of these people's lives."
Yeah, if there's when you say Harlem Renaissance, there's only one face that should come up, and it should be Jesse Redmond Fawcett.
Wow. Mm,
Yeah,
that's amazing. This is like some real archival, like this is some deep, like Black history, Harlem history, literary history. That's amazing.
yeah. So it was the perfect book for me to write.
Wow. And so, do you think, Victoria, that just since you mentioned the 20s and all of these rich people having that connection to your protagonist, do you feel or foresee that there is a follow up, additional stories that will branch off?
Not for me. No, not for me. There's so many other stories and people to explore. So I'm moving on to the next story. This is my contribution to the Harlem Renaissance. And I don't want to do sequels in historical fiction.
Yeah,
I got hung up in sequels and a little bit when I was writing contemporary fiction, and I've never liked sequels for me because they don't stretch me as a writer. You're writing the same thing again.
sure.
And
Mhm.
so, but in historical fiction, there are way too many other people to write about. There are Black women nurses who were the foundation for the cure for tuberculosis.
Mm,
There are all these Black people who founded and purchased land, and we have these historically Black beaches. I mean, there's so many other stories for me to explore. Talking about the 60s, the March on Washington would have never happened without
right.
three Black women. So I have too many other stories I have to explore.
Wow, that's key. I mean, and I appreciate that you want to really kind of explore all of that. And so, do you consider yourself a researcher as well?
Well, I have to be a researcher. I'm not a historian. But even when I was writing contemporary fiction, I would research the places that my characters traveled to. So I've always been a researcher. Now it's much more in depth, because I am trying to stick to history. But I've always been, I think any good writer is a researcher.
Yes, indeed. And Victoria, also in terms of Harlem Rhapsody, as you mentioned, Jesse Redmond Fawcett publishing the poetry and works, the earlier works of some really renowned folks, Black writers that we all know about. Do you find that Jesse Redmond Fawcett, in terms of her own biography and works, are not as uh, well covered across when we look at literary history or Black history, in terms of her being a subject that we would know more about?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to me that not only did I not know her, but most people didn't know her. And I really should have known her because besides discovering every single literary legend of the Harlem Renaissance, she wrote more novels during the Harlem Renaissance than anyone. And her very first novel, There Is Confusion, which she's actually writing in my novel, Harlem Rhapsody. Her
Mm,
very first novel was the first novel ever written about the Black middle class. And it's so interesting to me because when people say they stand on someone's shoulders, sometimes I feel like it's just a cliche,
sure.
but I literally stand on her shoulders because for 28 years, I've been writing books about the Black middle class. And she wrote the
Mm,
very first one. So we don't know her, but you know what? No one knew Zora Neale Hurston's name. She died in obscurity until the 1970s when Alice Walker, who wrote The Color Purple, had been reading some of Zora's works and said, why doesn't everybody know this woman's name? No one knew
right.
her. No one knew her name in the 1970s.
Mm,
And Alice went down and found Zora's unmarked grave. She got a marker for her, and Alice Walker is the reason why we know Zora Neale Hurston today. And so, what
wow.
I'm
Mhm.
hoping, this was not the reason I wrote Harlem Rhapsody. I just thought about it after the book was written. But I have a 6-year-old granddaughter that I'm hoping when she's in her 20s, she'll say, "What do you mean nobody knew Jesse Redmond Fawcett?" So, I'm hoping people will come to know Jesse Redmond Fawcett through this novel.
That's amazing. And that being one key, purpose for the book. What else, Victoria, do you want readers and audience to gain from this new work, Harlem Rhapsody?
I think they're just some lessons. Like I think they're wonderful lessons for women to learn in this book, as they're uh, in the workplace. One thing that we didn't talk about was Jesse and W.E.B. Du Bois had an affair, which I
What?
had to, yes, which I had to cover in this book.
I was about to say, because he was married. I'll never forget there's a photo. I want to say a wedding photo, whether it was his or
It was probably his daughter. The
his
photo you, yeah,
daughter.
yeah, you
That's
probably
right.
think of his daughter. But
Yeah.
yes, he was married, and they had a long term. So this was no side chick. They had a long term. According to his biography, he called it a parallel marriage.
Oh, that's
Um,
why you said it was not a side chick, as in she was not secret, I
yeah,
guess.
well, they didn't go out and say we're having an affair, but people saw Jesse with W.E.B. Du Bois 100 times more than they saw him with his wife.
Wow.
Because 100 years ago, the wife always stayed at home
Home with the kids and
with the,
doing domestic.
yes,
Right.
yes. And in fact, his wife lived in Europe for years at a time with their daughter. So it was an interesting relationship. It wasn't your normal kind of type of thing.
It's very interesting. It sounds like a work wife because when I think of Jessie Redmond Fawcett, I also thought of her as an editor.
Well,
Was she ever an editor?
well, she edited all the people I just told you about.
Over, yes, okay.
Yeah, she discovered them, she mentored them, she edited them, and she published them.
Mm,
So she published them before anybody else. So she was their editor. But she
okay.
wrote too, and she wrote 4 books during that time. More books than anybody else.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Hmm. Their lives, we think, we think that, oh, the times that they lived in were so restrictive, but then when I hear things like this, I'm like, these people were really living. They weren't,
Yeah.
they were living their lives, relationships, businesses, books, you name it. It sounds, while they were black folk, they were going after the most of what they could get in life, it sounds like.
Exactly.
And so, did Jessie Redmond Fawcett ever have a family of her own?
After outside of the timeline of my book, when she finally left the Crisis, because she was the literary editor for the Crisis,
Okay.
and Du Bois created that position to bring her from Washington D.C. up to New York so she would be close to him. But he
Hmm.
created it just to have her there, and she turned it into the movement that we now know as the Harlem Renaissance.
Wow.
And so, but when she left the Crisis after they broke up, she broke up their relationship after 15 years.
Mm,
Um, she wanted to stay in publishing, but she could not get a job. And this time it wasn't just because she was Black, it was because it was 100 years ago and she was a woman.
yep.
And so she couldn't get a job in publishing. And so she ended up getting married because the only reason she did not want to marry was because she wanted to have a career. When that
Mm,
was out the window, there was nothing left for her to do. She ended up getting married at the age of 47. And I'm not sure how happy the marriage was. She did leave New York for a little while to go teach at Hampton for 3 years.
okay.
And so I have letters where people were saying to her, I know Hampton's wonderful, but you have a husband. You ever going home to him? And she was like, oh, he'll be fine, that kind of thing. So I'm not sure. She did finally leave Hampton and returned to New Jersey, moved to New Jersey with her husband. And then when he died, she moved back home to Philadelphia with one of her stepbrothers.
Mm, interesting. Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing, Victoria. Well, I really appreciate you bringing this to our, literary attention, and you continue to be such a leader, in publishing and in literature. And so I wanted to ask you, Victoria, what are you excited about? Um, what are you excited about next? Whether it's book talk or a new work or anything else that you're doing that you want to share?
Well, I'm actually in Harlem for the 100th anniversary of the Schomburg Library Research Center, which is the library of the Harlem Renaissance, I did all of my research there. And it's the
Wow.
library that's in the book because Jessie Redmond Fawcett would meet there. Langston Hughes would do poetry readings there. In fact, Langston is buried there at
Mm.
the library. And so I'm here for that. So that's very exciting. I just got my edits back for my next book, which will be out next summer, but I can't say what it is yet. So I'm very
Oh,
excited about that.
congratulations.
Yeah, so I'm very excited about that. So I'm just still working, and Rashonda Tate and I are about to go on a Black book tour, Black Bookstore book tour, because I've been blessed over the last 3 months since Harlem Rhapsody's been out. I
Hmm.
have been all over the country. But unfortunately, I most of my stores are not Black bookstores. And
Wow.
so once my tour just officially ended last week. And so I took a week off, and the next 2 weeks, I will be touring the country, well, mostly in the South, because there's over 100 Black bookstores, and I'm only going to get a chance to go to 8 this time
Wow.
around. But maybe every 6 months I can do this. I don't know. We'll see.
Wow, that makes me think about, what is it, a Kibalon bookstore. And back in the day, there used to be Caribou Books in, I
Yeah,
want to say,
yeah,
Maryland. And uh,
yeah.
some, do you get out west to some of the
Well,
bookstores in LA?
I did a bookstore. I mean, I did a tour in California. I won't be doing a Black bookstore tour out there because
Oh,
they're not. It's too spread out. Like
yeah,
here, I could go from Dallas to Tulsa to New Orleans and Atlanta, and it won't be too much, you know?
right. Wow, that's amazing. Well, Victoria, congratulations on wrapping up your recent tour. And also, congratulations. I know you getting back. Rashonda is your fellow, your co publisher, right? With
Well,
the,
we no longer have Brown Girls Publishing.
oh, okay.
Yeah, only because it just got to be too much, and I just don't have the time. But yes,
Yeah,
we had a company called Brown Girls Books, but we no longer have that.
sure. Oh, well, it's exciting that you'll be, reuniting with her for this
Yeah.
next tour then. And I'll certainly be excited to look and see what you all are doing and where you're at with that.
Yeah, so people could check out. I'm Victoria Christopher Murray all over social media. So, and we have the bookstore tour. We're calling it a bookstore Black Bookstore Celebration. Because let's go out here and support these Black bookstores that make sure you can get a Black book.
That's right. Well, that is so wonderful. Victoria, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with me on Nerdacity Podcast. I so appreciate you and admire all the wonderful work you're doing. And I wish you the best of success in everything that you have going on with Harlem Rhapsody and, of course, with your forthcoming works.
Well, thank you so much.